All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I do show that it is 9 o'clock, so to be respectful of your time, we are going to go ahead and get started. We may have some more people who join us a little bit later, but we are recording this meeting and we will make it available for viewing afterwards. So first, I'm Emily Hathcock with the Barren River Area Development District. I'm the Associate Director of Planning and Development. From Brad, we also have Kim Morrow, our GIS manager. Kim, do you want to say hi?
Morning, everyone. I hope you're all well.
Good morning.
And then also on our call, we have Colin Watkins, our GIS intern. Colin, do you want to say hi?
Hey guys, good to be here.
And then the first part of our presentation will actually be with Jeff Ledbetter with DataMark. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeff at this time. You are free at any point to unmute, ask questions, type questions in the chat. We'll be monitoring. But yeah, Jeff, take it away.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Emily. Hello, everyone. Glad to be with you this morning. I've been excited for this meeting. I've been talking with Emily and Kim about the opportunity that the state has to take care of some GIS business. I'll start off by introducing myself. I'm a GIS nerd at heart. I've been working with that technology for 20 years plus, and the last 10 of it I've been working in 911 centers and in operational fire and law enforcement roles, supporting operational fire and law enforcement responders with GIS technologies. And so that is my passion point at the intersection of GIS and public safety. And so I'm really happy that I have the opportunity to be here, most especially because I actually live in this area. I've recently moved to Bowling Green, and it's always important for me and a passion point for me to make sure that the place I live in and my family lives in is safe and sound. And so GIS gets to play a role in that in the very near future, more than it ever has before, and that's exciting for me. So forgive me if I get a little bit nerdy on you here for a second, but I want to take you through, and I want to do my best to stay speaking English to you instead of GIS. And so as Emily said, if you have any questions, definitely encourage you to come right out and ask them. And I'll do my best to answer them for you, and we can explore this opportunity together here. So what I want to do today is really talk a little bit about what NextGen 911 is, what the role of GIS is in that, and then I want to share some things that the NG911 GIS working group of the Kentucky 911 Services Board shared that really demonstrate the opportunity that lies before us as far as getting the state what they need for NextGen 911, getting the locals what you need for NextGen 911, and then making sure that your citizens are served with faster, better response, and therefore more lives saved and all the good that comes from that. So what is NextGen 911? It's a lot of things, and as I said, I'm a GIS nerd, so I'm not going to try to be all inclusive of what Next Generation 911 is, but basically a big part of it is that, well, at its roots, it's a transition from a copper wired telephone network to an IP-based, internet protocol-based network. And this just shows kind of some of the components, the big components of Next Generation 911, right? An EZNet is what's known as the Emergency Service IP network that the state would host here in Kentucky, and that every 911 center would connect to in order to deliver 911 calls to the right PSAP, public safety answering point. And a piece of that, a software functional element piece of that, is the NextGen core services. The NextGen core services are the software elements that kind of actually do the heavy lifting. Next Generation 911 represents real automation of a lot of things that have been done by copper network switches before will now be done by software elements. And inside these next-gen core service elements that answer the question, where do I send the call? And is that a valid location pre-service, lies GIS data. And we'll talk about what kind of GIS data and the accuracy and completeness standards for those data as well. In addition to that IP network and the next-gen core services, there is upgraded 911 call handling equipment, and then a whole new world of software support maintenance upgrades that have to take place in order to accomplish this. These are what I refer to as wires and cabinets, because again, I'm a data nerd, and so I'm focusing in on that piece of it today. And there's a lot of, there's like a whole world of this stuff out there that I would invite you to kind of do some research on and get initiated to, because it's going to bring about a lot of great benefits. And this is a demonstration of some of those benefits. 911 hasn't really been connected to the outside world except via voice up to this point. And in the future, on an IP-based network, the possibilities open. It be connected to text and video, automatic crash notification, social networking, pictures, medical information. Things that we can't even imagine happening will happen in an automatic fashion. One of the best examples that I've heard of that is these interesting sort of health telematic devices. Things like your pacemaker can now have a wireless chip in it that will just call 911 and transmit the pacemaker data if you have an incident, right? Because you'll need some help right away. And along with it, it'll transmit a location, which is kind of the biggest element. And some of the most difficult parts of 911 today is, what is your location? What is the location of the emergency? If you're nonverbal or otherwise don't know where you're at, it's a challenge for call takers to determine and route the right resource. So let's talk a little bit about GIS in the public safety answering point up to now. It's been there, but it's been a nice to have and not a mission critical component. It certainly is great for 911 mapping or CAD mapping. If you have AVL, it certainly supports that as well. But in next generation 911, we'll add a fourth bucket to those three. Geospatial call routing is kind of the official term of it, but that GIS data will route now 911 calls that come in across with what's referred to as a civic location, or as you might think of it, an address, right? A plain address, 123 Main Street. These are going to be the landline phones, the quote unquote landline phones that are out there, the business phone lines and things like that are going to come in with civic locations or addresses. And then wireless devices themselves are going to transmit a geodetic location or coordinate-based locations, and the routing will occur. It's essentially a point in polygon. Let me back up here and finish saying this. It's essentially a point in polygon query, and that if that sounds like big fancy words, basically it's going to find the address and then ask the data, what boundary, what PSAP boundary do I need to send this to? Or again, pre-service provisioning, is this a valid location? If I say that this is the location, will you be able to route it when the call comes in? So that's going to require a few things, and data-wise, it's going to require 5 layers. One is road center lines with address ranges. 2 is address points for habitable structures. And as we go into the Kentucky 911 Services Board GIS Working Group guidelines, you'll see that they're actually going to be requiring a lot of points out of you for structures and more than structures. We'll get into that in just a minute. But it also will require polygons, areas, right, that show what PSAP answers the call in this area, what fire agency responds in this area, what law enforcement agency, EMS, any other responder or any other transfer that there would be to a secondary answering point needs a polygon in that system so that it can perform that query. And so in order to produce these data sets, we have what we call our purposeful order. It does, in the first step, MSAG and centerline comparison, and I'm going to do my best not to get too far into the weeds here, but it's an important question. If I have GIS data, I have road center lines, is it ready to use in NextGen 911? If you can get through step 4 and with confidence in the substantial completeness of your GIS data, then you can say yes to that question. But it starts at number 1 with comparing legacy databases or existing 911 databases of the Master Street Address Guide and the Automatic Location Information Database that has information about subscribers and has information about road names and address ranges so that those locations can be located in the current system. Compare those to the GIS data that you're using as a starting point. What you'll find in there is that it'll show you where you have more work to do and where you have a little work to do. From there, you can move into creating the boundaries. The boundaries in a lot of cases, in Kentucky's cases, are going to be fairly easy because they're going to tend to be county boundaries. That said, though, this comparison will actually define for you where there may be some variations of that boundary. And so that's the second step. This third step, location data normalization, you can think about this as just making your data consistent. So between the address points and the road center lines, which probably have different data sources, data owners, and data stewards, you can make them consistent between the two. You can imagine how many opportunities there are for just sort of misentering data or forgetting about a particular address point or not getting the right range overlaps, lots of different problems in normal use of the data up to this point, because the precision and accuracy that it requires for NextGen 911 have not been required in previous applications for public works, for transportation, for the planning department. They haven't really needed to have the level of accuracy and completeness that NextGen 911 will require. Now, once you get through this significant effort here on number 3, you've kind of come to the point to where you're just about ready to say, I'm ready. Number 4 is ALI to GIS comparison. ALI is that automatic location information database of the current 911 environment. That what it basically contains is a subscriber list of everybody with a landline phone or a business line, those devices that'll still use a civic address to route from. And so this comparison basically answers the question, can my GIS data answer the same questions as my existing 911 databases? So if you can say with confidence that that happens, you're ready to move forward. If this comparison, however, will find any remaining issues that you weren't able to iron out in this phase, this will find, and you can iron them out there and say that I'm substantially complete on my transition of GIS data and it's ready for NextGen 911. Now that doesn't mean once you get into the actual system that some issues won't crop up, but it does mean that you've ironed out a substantial portion of the issues and you shouldn't have many moving forward. And then of course, step number 5 is once you're into the system, you'll always have a need for data maintenance. Nobody buys a brand new car and doesn't, do oil changes for it, because then they'd just be buying a lot of brand new cars. So GIS data maintenance becomes a critical phase as well that will require ongoing resources devoted to that as addresses change, as annexations take place, as new roads are added or their locations are realigned and things like that occur. Maintenance in the data is going to be critical. So let's talk about data quality here. I mentioned earlier that it's going to need to be brought to a level of accuracy and precision that it's never needed to be brought to before. So I like to talk about these dimensions of data quality that we examine. And really, this isn't something that's special to us. This is really a data facet, right? Dimensions of data quality. The first question is about availability. Is the data available? And I think to present, that's been assessed in a lot of different ways in the state of Kentucky. And the fact is that about half the state wasn't able to submit road center lines or boundaries when they were required to in 2019 and 2020. And so the state has seen this as a deficit, has seen this as something that has to be addressed. And that's why we're here today talking about grant funding opportunities, because they know that that's something they're going to need to support. The next question is the data complete? Is all the necessary data present? Even if you were able to submit data in 2019 and 2020, it's highly likely that you didn't have everything you needed to have. And then the third question, accuracy, does it reflect the real world to the extent necessary? These three questions really encapsulate the building process of your data for NextGen 911. Is it available? Is it complete? Is it accurate? You put in a level of effort to get to where you can say substantially yes to each question 1, 2, and 3, and we move into that maintenance phase. Then in maintenance phase, the real important questions are, is it timely? Do you have it when you need it? And is it consistent? Are my call delivery systems, are my dispatch systems, are my transportation systems, my permitting systems, all using the same data so that there's no dissonance between questions from all those systems? This requires collaboration in a way that's never been before either, because even if you keep your data kind of on an island and in a bubble, you're going to have to match up on boundaries and borders to be sure that when the call moves, your map is accurate, or to ensure that if there's a question about which PSAP it should go to, which answering point should go to, the map data is clear. Because those next-gen core services I referenced on the first slide, those are going to be machine-to-machine interfaces. They won't have the luxury of having a human watch the routing occur and say, wait, that's not right. It needs to go to the other PSAP. And one of the great benefits of NextGen 911 among the long list is that there will be many fewer transfers of calls because the location will have been assessed properly the first time, as long as your GIS data is what it needs to be. But collaboration will be necessary. I talked earlier about the necessary layers. PSAP boundaries and road center lines are the most critical. You can geocode the address off the road center line and query the boundary of the PSAP to say, where do I send this call? You have what you need to start. And then for transfers, these emergency service boundaries, that's the law, fire, and EMS boundaries. And then address points, the role of address points in all of this is to clarify where there's questions about where a location is at. This is especially critical in boundary areas. This is especially critical in complicated areas like multifamily housing or multi-tenant commercial areas where there's a lot of addresses, and particularly around boundaries. So let's talk a little bit about the 911 Services Board requirements. I already referenced these dates of 2019 and 2020, and they've you have a date out there of next year, 2021 July, submitting site structure points. This GIS working group of the Services Board gave a presentation recently. This was back in October when they were announcing the grant funding that was to come out, and that did come out in the first part of November. And we'll talk about schedule of that in just a minute as well. But they proposed an adjustment, a little bit of clarification on this, is that they want site structure points for each address structure by July of next year. Everybody has to have a target to hit, whether you're ready for that or not. You've got to have a target to hit. So you know that they want you to start working on it. They went on to give a little more detail, right? Site points, which would be kind of more aligned with parcel points than structure points. They want in 2022. And then subaddress points, which definitely represents the biggest, the heaviest lift, the most effort, is they want to have available in 2023. Now, the timing of that lines up with their plans for all those other software elements that we didn't talk about because I'm a GIS nerd and not a networking person. But they're going to be bringing the networks, the call handling equipment, the new software, the new systems online, and they're hoping to have all of that in place in 2023 so that they can really say with substantial completeness that they are routing calls, 911 calls, along with all the benefits of NextGen 911 in Kentucky in 2023. And then provisioning boundary is something that they're actually going to provide themselves to you. And that'll be a topic that'll come along with time. Now let's talk about what's the difference, right? Again, going back to structure points, site points, subaddress points. What's the difference? What are they looking for in terms of level of accuracy and precision? This is some examples that they gave in their presentation. They're looking for structure points in a residential setting, right? The point should occupy the structure. It doesn't have to be on the front door. It can be. That's what this demonstrates if you put it on the front door. This is what we refer to as precision, right? Is it at the precision of the structure or is it the precision of the front door? That's what this example is of. This is a multi-tenant housing or multi-family housing example here. Do you want it on the structure or on the front door? And then a multi-tenant commercial setup here as well. I know everybody has some strip malls that have sub-addresses in them. This is the 2023 submittal, right? Actually, these are all main addresses. So I misled you there for a second. These are all main addresses. So we have strip centers where everybody has a different main address as well. So those are actually going to be due in 2021. And how many of you can confidently say I'm ready for that? I don't know. That's the question really at hand. Do you need help getting there? More examples of structure point placement. Again, demonstrating that you could have one point here that represents these 4 addresses. And in the commercial setting, it's going to be right in the middle of the structure. Another example of where you have a site, right, with multiple buildings, probably something like a retirement home or something like that here. Do you need those addressed onto the structure, right? All with an address of 100. How many trailer parks or mobile home parks, I probably should call them, mobile home parks or other types of multi-structure addresses are out there with one main address point representing hundreds of structures? They want that really blown out so that each structure has a point. Even if it's the same address number, you can add additional sub-address information like space number, unit number, building name, and things like that to just make them distinct and not duplicate. And here's an example that is kind of scary, right? In terms of a GIS person looks at this and goes, how am I going to create that for my entire county? It's a big effort. It's a lot of effort. And this is the 2023 submittal. This isn't saying they want to see a floor plan, but it is saying that they want to see all of the units in their correct position on the structure. Unit A through unit F on the structure. I'm sorry, on the correct position of the structure. Again, in that mobile home park, demonstrating how you need to use the unit number field to show the subaddress information that makes lot 71 distinct from lot 72. And then site points are a good example of that are parks, community colleges, corporate campuses where you have multiple structures but one main address point. They're going to want to see examples of, these are great examples of non-addressed dispatchable locations. That's the technical term. Non-addressed dispatchable locations. The address point that was submitted in 2021 was 3390. Well, these don't have their own addresses, so they're not sub-addresses, but it's important for you to understand that if you have a cardiac event on the tennis courts, that this is where you're going versus a cardiac event in building A. Your fire engine is going to need to turn differently to get to the tennis courts than they will to building A. And so it's important for not only call routing purposes in NextGen 911, but also for dispatch purposes out of your CAD systems for these things to be specified. And in the 911 Services Board, I'll do a big hat tip to them. They acknowledge the fact that there's a real opportunity here in aligning the data between the call routing system and the dispatch systems to make the dispatch systems as good as they possibly can be and optimized for situations that, again, increase life-saving opportunities and responses by a first responder. If you have lakes with marinas or piers or any of that kind of stuff, imagine the types of park equipments in large parks that also are going to need site points. That's what is represented here by these kind of blue dots. Again, main addresses. They've apparently in this location, they addressed the actual body of water because those cell phone calls now are going to be well located in the NextGen 911 environment. They're going to be located by coordinates, not by addresses. So your dispatch system really needs to offer context for dispatching. That if you can see that the person on the cell phone in the boat that's in distress is in this location, you can dispatch everybody to this site point so that there's no question about how they should approach the location, how they should get there, and there's no delays in actually getting them there. Then they introduced this idea of an access point. Let me just draw a visual picture for you. Well, actually, I don't need to draw the picture. They did a good job of doing that. The access point would represent something if you have a private road especially, would be a great example. And that's what this is, I believe. A private road who you want to access down here, but you've got 4 properties on it. Instead of having them try to route around, and another complicating factor of reality that could demonstrate this is if you had a street that came back here, but for some reason was not accessible, something like a raised highway, it might look on a map, on a 2D map, it might look like you could approach 510 Rain from this street back here, but in fact, you need to approach it from down here for 523, which is out here. This is the example, right? In a rural setting, which is much of Kentucky, there are long driveways and there's structures that may look like they're closer to another road, but in fact, the way you have to access a property is through some other alternate means. And these access points point out those alternate means. And so if I just back up to this other slide they put out there, this is not a required data set for NextGen 911, but it is a data set that they want to encourage their entering points to develop. And it's well aligned with the development of address points data so that you don't have to sort of mobilize an effort 2 times in order to accomplish both. So they must be associated with an address and have one access point for one address. So there needs to be a 1-to-1 relationship there. I don't want to get too far into the weeds. And so I'm going to kind of pause here for a second, check and see if there's any questions on these requirements before we start talking about the grant, and then I'll hand back over to Emily. So have I confused anybody? Any clarifications?
I will just remind everyone you are on mute. So if you have questions, please unmute yourself. We're happy to talk to you.
Okay, if not, no problem. Let's talk about the grant cycle that's going on. So they, again, hat tip to the 911 Services Board. They know that GIS data is critical, and they know that there's a big gap to fill, particularly in that space between cities where resources are harder to come by. So what they did with their annual grant cycle that typically occurs in the spring is they actually slid the 2021 cycle back to November. So it opened up November 2nd. Applications are due February 19th, and they want to have it funded before May so that people can be using the funds in May through 2023. Now that's a $3 million allocation that they've given to that 2021 cycle. And then they're going to do the same in 2022 and slide it back to November, put it on a similar timeline trajectory, and they have allocated $3 million to that cycle as well. And so you have an opportunity here. There's a need not only for the state to have this GIS data, but there's a need for your local responders to have this GIS data. And there's a golden benefit to all the rest of the departments that might be able to use the data in other systems, because it's gonna far surpass their needs for accuracy and completeness. And so you've got definitions of what needs to be done, and you've got an opportunity to get funding here. And I'm glad to have the opportunity to share some of the details of this with you. If you have any questions, I'm all ears, but otherwise, Emily, I'll pass it right to you.
Thank you very much. And I will switch the screen real quick, and we'll get a little bit more into the actual grant program itself. So does anyone have any questions before we dive into the technicalities of the grant application program? All right, so the first thing is only PSAPs are eligible to apply for funding. And the emphasis is placed on projects that will work with Next Gen 911. The grant itself is going to be a reimbursement grant, so you will actually have costs up front that you would then get reimbursed for. They also, and we'll get to this in a minute, they do encourage a 10% match for the most competitive applications. If you are looking at equipment, only equipment designated for primary use in a primary PSAP is allowed. So then again, they do encourage a 10% local match to make your application the most competitive, and it's scored on 3 priorities. So that's project justification, project finance and sustainment plan, and project management. The other key thing to note in this is that any project that is requesting more than $30,000 will have to go through procurement, and that procurement actually has to be completed before you submit your application. So Jeff went over this a little bit. I've got it again here. This is the timeline for the grant funding. So applications are due February 19th. This is an in-hand date. It's not a postmark date. So they have to receive it in their office by February the 19th. They're going to do peer reviews of it March 3rd and 4th. And then the board will approve on the 23rd of March. After that, they're doing award notifications March 26th with a contract start date of May 15th. So I have a quick poll question. So let me go ahead and get that one running. And the poll for the first poll is, prior to this, you should have a poll on your screen now if you would just click through for us. Do you already plan to submit an application for board funding for 911 services? So this is, you already have a project in mind, you're working on it, anything like that. So I'll give just a few seconds here for a response. All right, it looks like we have about 50% of respondents saying that yes, you are planning to submit an application, 25% saying no, and 25% saying possibly. So if you are already planning to submit an application, Brad can assist you with that effort. We can assist you with application development or review. We can assist you through your procurement process or any other technical assistance. But we can also assist in a regional effort if there is interest in that. I'm gonna share this. So regionally, we would look at multi-jurisdictional plans and solutions, having regionally complete data sets, and then help in determining gaps and barriers to any existing data. So the next steps for a regional effort would really be to determine the level of interest in such an effort, and possibly determining a champion PSAP to be the submittal point, because again, only PSAPs can be the applicant. So in a scenario like this, if you guys were interested in a regional application, we would need to identify a lead PSAP to be the main applicant submitter, with other PSAPs signing on as a multi-jurisdictional effort. So Brad's staff will work with each interested party to determine what needs you have, how we would need to write the scope of work for the project to include everything that would need to be procured or updated, and then we would also assist with that application development. So knowing that, I actually have a second poll that I'm going to share now that would really just ask, let's see, poll. It's asking if you are interested in submitting an application at all, and then if you are interested in submitting a regional application. And so I've got those running. On your screen now is the contact information for us at Brad. We're happy to answer questions. We will open it up at this point for anyone that has questions, and I'm also going to open it up for Kim for anything that I may have missed that needs to be addressed, because I am not the GIS expert, she is.
Well, one thing I'll add, Emily, I know with all of the counties that I see represented on this call today, our data is all over the board, and our technical ability is all over the board. So I just want you to understand that if you need technical assistance, we are here. If you need grant writing assistance, we are here. I think there's a great regional opportunity to use a software that makes it easier for non-GIS folks to actually have input into the GIS data. And I think that's kind of my goal with a regional process, is to make the maintenance of our data easier. Jeff, I don't know if you want to speak to that at all.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've actually have a product that is focused at just that. And it's really geared at making GIS approachable to, PSAP professionals, because that's our target audience. That's my niche of passion point, right? Is one of the biggest challenges for a 911 director or a dispatch supervisor or manager is that they also have to do GIS, because there's just not enough resources for them to have a Kim Morrow. And so we do have a web-based product that simplifies it so that you don't have to understand map projections. You don't have to understand, how to add data and things like that, where it allows for approval process of edits to be made, or simply allows you even just to notify somebody like Kim that you need a change made in your GIS data, so that you don't even have to understand anything about the GIS data at all. Simply just put a pin in a map and give the details of what needs to happen. So I think that maintenance phase of that purposeful order is what that focuses in. And it also gives some technical tools to Kim that would allow her to easily monitor and the collaboration and kind of manage the collaboration that has to take place really in order for her to continue to support the multiple counties that she supports.
Right. And one thing we haven't really mentioned is data formatting. So what your mapping systems use in your PSAP is probably a different format from what the 911 Services Board wants. And a tool like Jeff is speaking of allows us to go from one format to another easily. Really, Emily, I think that's about all I have. I guess if we want to open it back up for questions.
Absolutely. So does anyone have any questions? If you're interested in applying and you want to some help, please let us know. We're also will be reaching out to garner interest as well. But yeah, open for questions. All right, hearing none. Like I said, we will be in touch and to see if anybody needs some assistance submitting applications or wants to kind of think through how they might submit an application. And we have recorded this call, so we'll make it available as well. But thank you very much for joining us this morning. You have our contact information. We're happy to assist in any way that we can. And otherwise, everybody have a very Merry Christmas.
Do the same.
Merry Christmas.
Bye.
Merry Christmas.
Merry
Thanks
Christmas
for
to
coming,
everyone.
guys.
Thank you all.